The laughter around the table felt like knives against my skin. The golden glow of candles flickered against polished silverware, but I couldn't taste or smell a thing. The roasted turkey, the spiced pumpkin pie, the sweet rolls glistening with butter, all of it was lost under the sound of his voice. Maybe if you actually knew how to cook, we wouldn't have to rely on store-bought pies every year. My husband sneered, lips curling like he'd scored a victory. A ripple of chuckles spread around the table. I sat frozen, my cheeks burning, my palms damp against the linen. And then, before I could even breathe, my daughter Emma rose quietly, tablet in hand. "Daddy," she said softly, "I think you should see this." Mornings in our house were always rushed, even on holidays. The alarm would buzz at 6, and I'd roll out of bed quietly so as not to wake Emma too early. The wooden floors of our bedroom were always cold against my bare feet, a detail I noticed more often lately, as though the chill mirrored something inside me. I'd pad into the kitchen, start the coffee machine, and lean against the counter listening to the quiet hum of the house. It was my favorite moment of the day, before voices, before demands, before his footsteps. By the time Emma shuffled in, her hair tangled like a bird's nest, I already had her favorite, warm milk with honey, waiting in her little mug. She would smile sleepily, a smile that always managed to stitch something back together inside me. "Morning, Mama," she'd say, her voice raspy. "Morning, baby." Those were the moments I lived for. The tiny rituals that felt ours alone, untouched by anyone else. My husband, Daniel, never joined us for these mornings. He said coffee on an empty stomach was pointless, and preferred to scroll through his phone upstairs until the smell of bacon or toast lured him down. When he finally appeared, his presence filled the kitchen in a way that always made me shrink, though I hated admitting it. He wasn't cruel every moment, not in obvious ways, but there was a sharpness to his words, a way he could make me feel small without ever raising his voice. At work, I was different. I worked part-time at a local library, a modest job but one I loved. The quiet rows of books, the smell of paper and ink, it all felt steady, safe. When I helped children find stories or elderly patrons navigate the online catalog, I felt useful, almost whole. Colleagues often described me as gentle, dependable, the heart of the place. I'd laugh it off, but secretly, it mattered more than I could say. Because at home, my worth always felt conditional. Daniel was an accountant, precise and proud of it, and he never missed a chance to remind me that my paycheck barely covered the groceries. I let the comments slide most days, telling myself it wasn't worth the argument. But a part of me kept track of every word, every dig. Emma noticed more than I wanted her to. She'd sometimes slip her hand into mine when Daniel's tone grew sharper, as though she could sense the shift in the air. That protective instinct in her, 9 years old and already carrying so much, broke my heart. Still, life had its bright spots. Emma and I had a small garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, herbs, even strawberries when the season allowed. Digging our hands into the soil together was grounding. She'd chatter about school, about the stories she wrote on her tablet, about her dream of being an author one day. I always told her she could be anything she wanted. And I meant it. Looking back, I think the garden symbolized everything I longed for: patience, care, slow growth, and finally, fruit worth tasting. So when Thanksgiving came around, I had clung to the hope of peace. Just one evening of laughter, of family, of Emma having the holiday memories I wished I'd had as a child. I told myself as I brushed Emma's hair into neat braids that morning, this year will be different. I should have known better. When I first met Daniel, he wasn't the man he is now. Or maybe I just didn't see clearly. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue 10 years ago. He was charming, quick with jokes, the kind of man who made everyone feel like they mattered. When he focused on me that night, I felt chosen, special. I was in my mid-20s, still patching myself together from a messy breakup, and his confidence felt like a steady hand pulling me out of the water. In the beginning, he did little things that seemed thoughtful. He'd insist on picking up the bill at dinner, even when I offered to split it. He brought me flowers once a week, always lilies, saying roses were too predictable. He remembered the name of my childhood dog after one casual mention, and I mistook that attention to detail for tenderness. But even then, there were moments, tiny cracks I ignored. The way he'd correct me in front of friends if I mispronounced a word. The time he laughed when I said I wanted to finish my degree, telling me, "Why? You'll just end up working part-time somewhere. I make enough for both of us." He framed it as generosity, but it left me quiet, unsure. When we married, I thought those edges would soften. Instead, they sharpened. The first time I felt truly humiliated was 3 months after our wedding. We were at dinner with his parents. I'd spent hours cooking, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, almondine. His mother took one bite and said, "It's good, dear." Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking. Not bad for someone who once burned pasta. Everyone laughed, and I laughed too, though inside I wanted to disappear. Later that night, when I told him how it hurt, he brushed it off. It was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive. That phrase, "don't be so sensitive," became a refrain. A weapon, really. Then Emma was born. She became my reason for everything. But motherhood didn't soften Daniel. If anything, it gave him new ground to criticize. I was too nervous, too indulgent. Not firm enough. He'd roll his eyes when I read to her at night, saying, "She won't remember any of this." He dismissed my instincts, my care, my effort. And yet I stayed quiet. For Emma. For the roof over our heads. For the illusion of a stable family. The betrayal that cut the deepest came 2 years ago. My mother had passed away, and she left me a small inheritance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover Emma's future college fund. I was clinging to that security like it was a life raft. One evening, I logged into the account and saw the balance was nearly drained. Confused, I confronted Daniel. He didn't even look guilty. "I moved it into our joint investments," he said casually, as though he'd done me a favor. "Without asking me?" I whispered, stunned. He shrugged. "It's our money now. Why let it sit there when it can grow?" But months later, when I pressed for updates, the money was gone. He admitted he'd used it to pay off a business debt I never knew he had. I cried for days, not just for the money, but for the betrayal of trust. That was my mother's last gift to me, to Emma. And he treated it like pocket change. I thought that was rock bottom. I thought I couldn't feel smaller. But I was wrong. Because humiliation has layers. And Daniel always seemed to find new depths. In public, he was the doting husband. He'd put his arm around me at barbecues, kiss my temple, call me the best thing that ever happened to me. Behind closed doors, he chipped away at me with comments sharp enough to draw blood, but soft enough that no one else would see. And yet, despite all of it, I still clung to the hope that family holidays could be safe ground. I baked pies, roasted vegetables, polished the good silver, all for the image of togetherness, for Emma's sake. But that Thanksgiving night, when he chose to humiliate me in front of his entire family with that one cruel remark, something in me snapped. And before I could even gather my pieces, Emma stood, tablet in hand, ready to do what I never could. The dining room glowed in the soft flicker of candles. The long oak table was set with polished silver, plates stacked with turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, and cranberry sauce. It looked like something out of a magazine, but the air was heavy, like everyone was performing for an invisible audience. Daniel thrived in this setting. He was in his element when he had an audience. His parents, his 2 brothers, their wives, and even his aunt and uncle were gathered, passing dishes, sipping wine, and laughing at his jokes. He leaned back in his chair like a king on his throne, basking in the attention. And then he aimed his words at me. "Maybe if you actually knew how to cook, we wouldn't have to rely on store-bought pies every year," he said, his voice carrying across the table. A ripple of laughter followed, though some smiles looked forced. My cheeks burned. My throat tightened as if someone had slipped a rope around it. My hands trembled against the fabric of my napkin. I forced a weak smile. I thought everyone liked the pies. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. Daniel smirked, reaching for his glass of wine. "They're fine. But imagine having a wife who could actually make them from scratch." The room went quiet for a beat, just long enough for the words to sting deeper. Then his younger brother chuckled, and the sound cracked the silence. Something inside me wilted. I stared down at my plate, blinking hard to stop the tears. I told myself to endure. It was just one dinner, just one night. But then Emma moved. Her small chair scraped against the hardwood floor. She stood, clutching her tablet in both hands, her braids brushing against her shoulders. Her voice was soft but steady. "Daddy," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "I think you should see this." The room froze. Forks hovered midair. Glasses clinked back onto the table. Daniel's smirk faltered. "Emma, sit down," he said, his tone sharp. But she didn't. She held up the tablet, her small fingers trembling slightly, but her chin lifted with a courage I didn't know she had. On the screen, I caught a glimpse: emails, screenshots, documents. My heart pounded. Emma's voice didn't shake. "You told Mama she was too sensitive. You told her she imagined things. But I saw everything on your laptop." She looked around the table, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know what you've been doing." Gasps rippled across the table. His mother leaned forward, her face pale. "Emma, what are you talking about?" Daniel shot up from his chair so fast it nearly toppled. "That's enough. Give me the tablet." His voice boomed, but there was something else in it, a crack of fear. Emma hugged the tablet to her chest. "No. You lied. You took Mama's money. You wrote those messages to another woman. You said," her voice broke, but she pushed through, "you said we didn't matter." A silence heavier than anything I'd ever known fell across the table. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to reach for her, to shield her, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen between terror and awe. Daniel's face drained of color. "That's not true," he stammered, glancing wildly around at his family. "She's a child. She doesn't know what she's talking about." Emma turned the screen so everyone could see. Email headers, bank transfers, chat logs. The evidence glared under the soft candlelight. Gasps and murmurs erupted. His brother leaned forward, squinting at the screen. His father's face hardened. His mother covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide. I could see it. The carefully built image of Daniel, the charming husband, the reliable son, cracking apart like glass dropped on tile. And in that moment, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel humiliated. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. Daniel lunged forward, but his uncle's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Sit down," his uncle said, his voice cold, commanding. Emma's eyes met mine then, searching, asking if she'd done the right thing. I nodded through the tears blurring my vision. My brave girl. My fierce, unshakable Emma. The table erupted in questions, in disbelief, in fragments of voices. But all I could hear was my heartbeat and Emma's words echoing in the room. "You said we didn't matter." And for the first time, Daniel had no answer. That night, after everyone had gone, after the shouting, the stunned silence, the hasty goodbyes, I sat alone in the living room. The candles had burned down to pools of wax. The table was still cluttered with half-empty glasses and stained napkins. The air smelled of turkey gone cold, but all I could taste was metal, like blood on my tongue. Emma had fallen asleep in her room, her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. I had tucked the blanket around her, kissed her forehead, whispered, "I'm proud of you." Her steady breathing was the only sound that steadied me. But when the house was quiet, the storm came. I paced the living room, my bare feet brushing against crumbs scattered on the floor. My hands kept clenching, unclenching. My thoughts ran like wild dogs, snapping at me from all sides. The humiliation, the betrayal, the lies, the way he looked at me, as if I were nothing more than a shadow, a nuisance, an inconvenience he regretted marrying. I replayed Emma's voice over and over. "You said we didn't matter." She had spoken the words I never dared to say. My chest ached. I pressed my hand to it, as if I could keep my heart from tearing. For years, I had told myself I was enduring for Emma, sacrificing my pride for her stability. But Emma saw everything. She carried it in her small shoulders, in her careful way of watching me, in the courage she found at that table. I thought I was shielding her. Instead, she was shielding me. The clock ticked toward midnight. I tried lying in bed, but every time I closed my eyes, the past rose up. The time he laughed at me in front of his colleagues when I stumbled over a word. The way he dismissed my ideas, even when they were right. The night I cried in the bathroom with the water running so Emma wouldn't hear. Years of silence pressed against my chest like a weight. I stood again, pacing. My reflection in the dark window startled me. My eyes were swollen, my hair messy, my face pale, but there was something new in my expression, a sharpness I didn't recognize. I whispered to myself, "Enough." It was the first time I'd said it out loud. The word vibrated in the quiet room, fragile but real. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled a notepad toward me, and started writing. Not a plan, not yet. Just fragments. Dates. Accounts. Names. All the things Emma had shown me on her tablet. All the things I had half suspected but buried. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the ink smudged. Every page was a piece of the truth. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Daniel was careful, polished. He wore charm like a second skin. People believed him. But for the first time, I had more than suspicions. I had evidence, and a daughter who deserved a mother who fought back. Sleep never came that night. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the pile of notes, the first fragile skeleton of a plan. My chest still ached, my hands still trembled, but beneath it all was something fierce. Not rage, not revenge, resolve. For years, I thought silence was survival, that keeping the peace, swallowing my pride, was the only way to protect Emma. But Emma's courage showed me the truth. Silence wasn't survival. It was surrender. And I was done surrendering. By dawn I had made my decision. I would gather every piece of proof. I would find someone who would listen, someone who couldn't be swayed by Daniel's charm. I would strip the mask off his face, not with screaming or fighting, but with the one thing he couldn't twist: the truth. When the sun finally rose, spilling pale light across the kitchen, I felt exhausted but strangely lighter. The house was still, the air cold, but inside me, something had shifted. I wasn't just a wife he could belittle. I wasn't just a shadow at his side. I was Emma's mother, and that meant I would fight. The days after Thanksgiving were a blur of tension. Daniel avoided me at first, leaving early for work, coming home late, moving through the house like a storm cloud that refused to break. His silence wasn't relief, it was warning. When he finally did speak, it was sharp and controlled. "You're filling her head with things she doesn't understand," he said one night, his voice low, eyes burning into mine. "You think letting Emma snoop through my files makes you a good mother?" I wanted to tell him it wasn't me, that Emma had done it on her own. But I stayed silent. Silence, for once, wasn't surrender. It was strategy, because in those quiet days I worked. While Emma was at school, I sat at the kitchen table with her tablet, going through the files she'd bravely saved. Emails to women he'd met during his business trips. Bank transfers to accounts I'd never heard of. Records of debts he'd hidden. I organized them into folders, printed what I could, and tucked copies into a binder I hid at the library where I worked. But I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. Daniel was persuasive, slippery. He could smile his way out of almost anything. I needed someone who wouldn't be swayed, someone who dealt in facts, not charm. That's when I thought of Karen, a friend from the library. She wasn't just a librarian. She was meticulous, almost obsessive about detail. More importantly, she was trustworthy. One evening, after closing, I slid the binder across the table to her. My hands trembled as I spoke. "I need you to look at this. Tell me if I'm crazy." She flipped through the pages in silence, her brow furrowing deeper with each sheet. Finally, she closed it, exhaling slowly. "You're not crazy," she said. "You're married to a man who's been hiding things that could ruin him." The validation made my knees weak. I had lived so long in the fog of gaslighting, doubting my own instincts, that hearing someone else confirm it felt like a lifeline. But Karen also warned me, "If you push this into the open, he won't take it quietly. Men like him don't let go of control without a fight." Her words haunted me that night. I lay awake listening to the creak of the house, wondering if I was strong enough to handle what was coming. And then the first setback came. I tried contacting a lawyer, someone recommended discreetly by Karen's cousin. But after one meeting, the lawyer called back saying he couldn't take the case. "Conflict of interest," he muttered vaguely before hanging up. Later, I learned Daniel's firm was one of his biggest clients. The second lawyer didn't even make it to a meeting. She canceled the morning of, apologizing but offering no explanation. It didn't take long to guess. Daniel had gotten to them. He had connections, resources, ways of making problems disappear. I felt cornered. Every step forward seemed to meet a wall. One night, I sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet, tears streaming down my face. Emma padded in, sleepy-eyed, clutching her stuffed bear. She sat beside me silently, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Why are you crying, Mama?" she whispered. I swallowed hard. "Because sometimes being brave feels very heavy." She squeezed my hand. "I can help carry it." Her words stitched me back together. For her, I had to keep going. So I shifted strategy. If lawyers were too tangled with Daniel's world, I would look elsewhere. I started documenting everything, dates, times, even the smallest comments he made. I kept copies of bank statements, text messages, receipts. At the library, I scanned documents and saved them to a secure drive only Karen and I knew about. But the more I dug, the clearer it became. Daniel wasn't just unfaithful. He was reckless. He had debts that stretched further than I imagined. Gambling, risky side deals, things that could collapse his polished image in an instant. And still, I doubted myself. What if no one believed me? What if I exposed everything, and he still found a way to twist it? I'd lived under his shadow for so long that stepping into the light felt blinding, dangerous. The worst moment came when Daniel confronted me directly. He must have sensed what I was doing. I was folding laundry when he cornered me, his body blocking the doorway. His smile was thin, his eyes sharp. "You're not as clever as you think," he said quietly. "If you try to drag me down, you'll regret it." My hands shook as I gripped the towel tighter. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," he whispered. And then he walked away, leaving the air suffocating in his wake. That night, I barely slept. I paced the hallway, my nerves raw. But somewhere in the middle of those sleepless hours, the fear shifted. His threat wasn't proof of his strength. It was proof of his weakness. He was scared. That realization steadied me. If he was scared, it meant the truth had weight. The next morning, I made a final decision. I wasn't just going to collect evidence. I was going to expose it, in a place where he couldn't spin it, couldn't bury it. A place where people who mattered would see it. And for the first time, I knew exactly where. It happened 2 weeks later, at Daniel's parents' house. They'd called a family meeting, something they rarely did, but I knew the real reason. After Thanksgiving, whispers had spread. Questions hung in the air. His mother wanted answers, his father demanded them, and Daniel couldn't dodge forever. The living room was packed, his parents, his brothers and their wives, his aunt and uncle, even his cousins. Emma sat beside me on the couch, her small hand gripping mine tightly. Daniel stood near the fireplace, posture stiff, jaw tight. He looked like a man about to go on trial. His father's voice was stern. "Daniel, your niece told us things we need to hear from you directly. About money. About another woman. About lies." Daniel chuckled, but the sound was brittle. "You can't seriously believe a child." Emma misunderstood. "My wife has been feeding her nonsense." He shot me a glare sharp enough to cut. I felt Emma tense beside me, but before I could speak, his mother's voice trembled. "Then explain this." She held up a stack of papers, copies of the very emails and bank transfers Emma had shown at Thanksgiving. Karen had helped me send them anonymously to his parents days before. The color drained from Daniel's face. "Where did you get that?" His voice cracked. "Does it matter?" His uncle snapped. "Is it true?" The room went silent. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. He tried to smirk, but it faltered. "It's complicated," he muttered. I stood then, my knees shaking but my voice steady. "It's not complicated. He took money from my inheritance, Emma's future, and used it to cover gambling debts. He's been lying for years. And the messages on those pages? They're to another woman. More than one." Gasps rippled. His younger brother cursed under his breath. His mother's hand shook so violently the papers fluttered. Daniel's charm, his armor, was crumbling. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing things out of proportion. Everyone here knows marriages aren't perfect. We've had issues, but stop." The voice cut through the air like a blade. It wasn't mine. It wasn't his parents. It was his older brother, Michael. The one person Daniel had always feared disappointing. Michael had been quiet until now, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. But when he finally spoke, his tone carried weight that silenced the room. "I trusted you," Michael said coldly. "I defended you when people called you reckless. But now? I see you for what you are, a liar. A thief. A coward." Daniel's eyes widened. "Michael, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Michael's voice didn't waver. "You've disgraced this family. And you humiliated your wife in front of all of us. Emma had more courage in that dining room than you've shown in your entire life." Emma squeezed my hand tighter. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. Daniel tried to regain control. "This is between me and my wife." "No," his father thundered, standing tall despite his age. "This is about more than your marriage. This is about integrity. And you have none." For the first time, Daniel looked small. The man who thrived on control, who strutted through life with confidence like armor, stood cornered. His lies laid bare under the harsh light of truth. I pulled a final envelope from my bag and placed it on the coffee table. Bank statements. Transfers. His gambling accounts. Everything you need to see. Daniel lunged forward, but Michael's hand shot out, stopping him with ease. "Sit down," Michael said coldly. Daniel froze. His greatest fear wasn't me exposing him. It was this, losing his family's respect, their trust, their approval. Without that, his image was nothing. And in that moment, I saw it in his eyes, panic. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, his mother spoke, her voice breaking. "Get out, Daniel. Until you face what you've done, you're not welcome here." His mouth opened in shock. "Mom, out," she repeated, tears streaking her cheeks. Daniel looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but found none. Even his cousins avoided his gaze. His carefully crafted facade had shattered, and there was no one left to hold the pieces. Emma leaned closer to me, whispering, "He can't hurt us anymore, can he?" I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Not anymore, sweetheart." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The drive home from his parents' house was silent, but not heavy. For once, silence wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. The night air was cool through the open window, and Emma leaned against me in the back seat, her small fingers still laced with mine. When we pulled into our driveway, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. His shoes weren't by the door, his coat wasn't hanging on the rack. It was just us. Our space. Our home. That night, Emma asked if she could sleep in my bed. She curled up beside me, whispering, "Mom, it feels lighter here. Like we can breathe again." I brushed her hair back from her forehead, fighting tears. "That's because we're safe now. No more pretending. No more secrets." The days that followed were strange. The rhythm of our lives shifted. I woke early, made breakfast with Emma, packed her school lunch without glancing over my shoulder, without wondering if a sarcastic comment would follow. The house echoed with laughter again. Simple things felt extraordinary. Baking cookies without fear of criticism. Dancing in the living room with music too loud. Sharing stories before bedtime without dreading when the front door would slam. One morning, as I dropped Emma off at school, she hugged me tighter than usual. "Mom," she said, her eyes shining. "You're smiling more. Like real smiles." Her words stopped me. I hadn't realized it, but she was right. The corners of my mouth weren't forced anymore. The weight on my chest was gone. For the first time in years, I was free to smile without fear. But freedom wasn't just emotional. It was practical too. Karen helped me file for divorce. We gathered the evidence, presented the gambling records, the affairs, the financial theft. My lawyer was sharp, relentless. The judge saw through Daniel's attempts at charm quickly. When the decree finally came, granting me full custody of Emma and securing the house in my name, I felt a wave of relief so powerful I had to sit down. Emma and I celebrated with ice cream for dinner that night, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, laughing with whipped cream on our noses. Not everything was easy. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I hadn't seen it all sooner. Regret crept in like an old ghost. But then I'd hear Emma's soft breathing from her room, steady and safe, and I'd remind myself, seeing the truth when we did saved us. Slowly, life rebuilt itself. Emma began to flourish. Her grades improved. She joined the school's art club, proudly taping her drawings to the fridge. She even made new friends, bringing them over for sleepovers where giggles spilled down the hallway long past bedtime. And me? I started to find myself again. I enrolled in evening classes, something I'd always put off because Daniel wouldn't like it. I began running in the mornings, headphones blasting, lungs burning in a way that made me feel alive. Karen and I grew closer too. She became not just my sister but my anchor. One night, as we sat on her porch with mugs of tea, she said, "You know the version of you I see now? This is the sister I always remembered. She's back." Her words made my throat tighten. Because she was right. I had been buried, smothered under lies and fear. But piece by piece, I was returning. One Sunday, Emma and I painted her room together. She chose a pale yellow, saying it felt like sunshine. By the time we finished, paint streaked our faces and our arms. And Emma giggled uncontrollably when I left a yellow handprint on the wall as a signature. That night, she kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thank you for choosing us, Mom. For choosing me." I held her close, realizing that in the storm of betrayal, the one thing Daniel could never touch was the bond between us. That bond had carried us through the fire, and now it was carrying us into the light. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt wide open. Months passed. Life with Emma felt steady, joyful even. The sharp edges of betrayal softened into something else. Wisdom, resilience. I had no desire to chase Daniel, no wish to beg him for accountability. But justice, it seemed, had its own way of circling back. One crisp autumn afternoon, Karen burst into my kitchen, her phone clutched in her hand. "You're not going to believe this," she said, sliding it across the counter. The headline read, "Local businessman arrested for embezzlement, gambling ties uncovered." The picture beneath it, disheveled hair, hollow eyes, a forced smirk, was Daniel. I stared at it for a long moment, not with shock but with a strange calm. It was almost inevitable. His lies, his greed, his hunger for shortcuts, it had all led him here. Emma wandered in, curious. "What's wrong?" she asked. I hesitated. She was young, but she deserved honesty. "Daddy made some very bad choices. And now he has to face the consequences." She frowned thoughtfully. "Like when someone cheats in a game, and then they're out?" "Exactly," I said softly. Except this was real life. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat alone with the newspaper spread before me. For years, his cruelty had stolen my voice, dimmed my spirit. But now, the world saw him for who he truly was. I didn't need to fight him anymore. The truth had done it for me. A week later, I received a letter from his lawyer. Daniel was desperate, pleading for a character reference, for some shred of mercy in his sentencing. I held the letter in my hands, my chest rising and falling with the weight of it. For a fleeting second, the old me, the woman who once believed love meant sacrificing herself, considered it. But then Emma's laugh echoed from the hallway, pure and unbroken, and my decision was made. I wrote back only one line. "My silence is my answer." I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and sent it away. That was my revenge. Not a scream, not a scene, not a war. Just absence. Just refusal. Life continued, brighter each day. Emma and I traveled that summer, just the two of us. We stood at the edge of the ocean, toes in the sand, waves crashing against our ankles. Emma spread her arms wide, shouting into the wind, "We're free." And she was right. We were free. One evening, months later, I sat on our porch watching the sunset bleed across the sky. Karen joined me, handing me a cup of tea. "You know," she said, "the best revenge isn't what happens to him. It's this." She gestured to the house behind us, to the laughter spilling from Emma's room. "You've built something he can never touch." I smiled, sipping the tea. For once, the bitterness had left me. All that remained was peace. Daniel's downfall was his own doing. Mine was my rebirth. And as the first stars blinked awake in the sky, I realized, revenge hadn't been the point. Survival had. Freedom had. Emma had. We had won. Quietly. Completely.